And I'm live, and I am going to cover today why Orthodox Christians believe Theotokos has never committed sin, that the Theotokos is the holiest human in creation. That's not God, obviously, because his human body is created. But yet she had original sin. This is against the Roman Catholic doctrine, Immaculate Conception, which was formulated mostly in the second millennium, and which then surprisingly has very hard to prove biblical and patristic merits. Today, I will not be going over the biblical argument, but be given the patristic argument because everyone will just accuse the other side of misunderstanding the Bible. So I'm going to share a screen so you can follow along with what I've written, and you will also see my citations, which I will read aloud. So here we go. So my argument is simple. Roman Catholics agree that the reasons humanity has passions, all right, both blameless like hunger and carnal like lust, and humanity has to die is the result of the fall. If Mary experienced these, then she experienced the results of the fall. She never sinned, this is what Orthodox teach, but she had postlapsarian flesh, meaning flesh that resulted from Adam and Eve's sin after the fall, postlapsarian. To have experienced the results of the fall is to be subject to the law of nature, or in other words, original sin. So that's the Orthodox doctrine. To quote a Roman Catholic Marian scholar, Father Capps, St. Augustine taught that Mary was left with Adamite flesh at her own natural conception. This is at minute 2540 of his video presenting his argument in favor of the Immaculate Conception to the Franciscan friars. So you can look that up on YouTube. So the position I'm giving now is the explicit position of the saints and not the modern scholars by the scholars' own admission. So as follows is every possible objection to my simple argument, which I just gave, that she never sinned, but she had postlapsarian flesh. Let's go over the possible objections. Objection 1. Mary did not experience struggle with the passions. The saints said she did. The Lord spoke to Mary, saying, "Do not be disturbed that to leave behind the corruptible world with all its desires. The extravagant demands of the flesh will no longer disturb you. You are ascending to fuller life, to delights free from passion, to permanent freedom from distraction." This is Saint. These are all saints, so I'm not going to say saint in front of all their names. Germanus and On the Dormition, Homily 2, Chapter 2. The Immaculate Virgin never involved herself in earthly passions, but was nourished in heavenly thoughts. Mary has shaken off the assaults of passion and has, from the morass of our passion, assaults of passion, has planted again the shoot of obedience to God our Father. She avoids all impurity and turns away from the morass of our passions. This is the Damascene and On the Dormition, Homily 2. These different quotations from Chapter 2, Chapter 3, and Chapter 19. Read them in fuller context. She, that is Mary, became the home of every virtue, turning her mind away from every secular and carnal desire, and thus keeping her soul as well as her body virginal. That's the Damascene and his exposition of the Orthodox faith, which I'll call the exposition, Book 4, Chapter 14. So as we can see, Mary did experience struggle with the passions, but she successfully repulsed every assault of passion. She never sinned, but she had post-lapsarian flesh. Those with pre-lapsarian flesh, Jesus as well as Adam before the fall, did not have a struggle against the passions. That's the teaching of the fathers. They did not have to turn away from every carnal desire, as John of Damascus says, according to Augustine. This is an On the Trinity, Book 13, paragraph 23. Incitement of sexual intercourse of men yield to it is satisfied by an act of sin. If not, then it is bridled by an act of refusal, which two things who could doubt to have been alien from paradise before sin? Turning her mind away, the very act of refusal, though it's virtuous, is a consequence of the fall. It's something that post-lapsarian flesh does. This settles the debate definitively, but we'll go on because there's other possible objections. Objection number 2. Mary did not have to die. The saints said she did. You had a body just like one of us, and therefore could not escape the event of death. That is the common destiny of all human beings. This is Germanus on the Dormition, Homily 1, chapter 6. Why couldn't the Theotokos escape death? Behold, the Virgin, the daughter of Adam and the mother of God. Because of Adam, she commits her body to the earth, but because of her son, she gives her body to the heavenly tabernacle above. Damascene on the Dormition, Homily 3, chapter 4. Right? Because she's the daughter of Adam and the mother of God, because of Adam, she commits her body to the earth. That's why she has to die. Adam and Eve, the ancestors of a race, cried out piercingly with joyful lips, "Blessed are you, our daughter. You inherited from us a corruptible body." All right. Again, Damascene on the Dormition, Homily 2, chapter 8. Likewise, less, fun passage because it takes a little more reading. Andrew of Crete concurs and on the Dormition, Homily 2, chapter 4. He says, "I think she fell into a natural sleep and tasted death, but did not remain held by it. She simply followed the laws of nature and fulfilled God's plan. She was moved through the transformation from a corruptible state to an incorruptible one." So let's go into the next objection, because it's fairly obvious that she had the passions and she had to die. Objection 3, death and passions are not the result of original sin, but the saints disagree. Let's prove this. Before their sin, they, this is Adam and Eve, were immortal. Otherwise, their prevarication cannot have been punished by the punishment of death. That's Chrysostom, Homily 16 on Genesis, chapter 5. Satan found them in paradise immortal, or Satan found them immortal in paradise. It's Gregory the Great in the Moralia, book 4, paragraph 15. For the natural innocent passions have entered to the life of man, owing to the condemnation by reason of the transgression. So the passions are there, not only just death, but the passions, even the natural innocent ones, because of the transgression. That's Damascene Exposition, Orthodox Faith, book 3, chapter 20. Man had been brought into being by God, resplendent the beauty of incorruptibility and immortality. Man plucked fruit, so drew down on himself not simply the corruption and death of his body, but also the capacity, the propensity for all the passions. He gave the body the inherent capacity to suffer, undergo corruption, and be totally dissolved. This is Maximus the Confessor in the Ambiguum, book 1. It's like question 8, paragraph 2. So we move on. Objection 4. Jesus experienced corruption and blameless passions the same way Mary did. The saints are emphatic, I'm going to say in quotations, that he, that's Jesus, was not subject to death. That's Damascene, Exposition, book 3, chapter 27, and nor had passions by necessity due to having no human father. As John Cassian states in Conference 5, paragraph 6, there was in him no true sin inherited from the fall, but only that was something like it. Romans 8:2, by the way. For he had no experience of the fiery darts of carnal lust. And I'm just going to repeat. No experience of the fiery darts of carnal lust, unlike the Theotokos who turned away from every carnal desire. So this is very different. Cassian continues. So that Christ, he might appear through these infirmities, that is of pain and corruption, to bear his own flesh, the state even of this fault and sin. So how did Jesus bear the appearance or likeness of sinful flesh? The saints taught he voluntarily accepted the blameless passions. He had a choice in the matter, unlike the Theotokos and the rest of us after the fall. Christ is a new Adam for the sake of the old and experiences it by suffering, voluntarily accepting to endure the blameless passions of the human body. Maximus Ambiguum, book 1, 4, 6. Maximus references this idea in quite a few places, in the Ambiguum and the Apus Scala, how you pronounce it. He writes, he experienced suffering in a divine way since it was voluntary. That's, again, Ambiguum, book 1, 518. He freely accepted the passions of punishment through his experience. And Maximus the Apus Scala Theologica et Polemica, chapter 1. So the Damascene also concurs with Maximus. It is by the good pleasure of the will that the flesh of Christ is permitted to suffer. He permitted the flesh to suffer what was proper to it, for no compulsion is contemplated in him, but all is voluntary. For it was with his will that he hungered and thirsted and feared and died. For all that would happen did so according to the laws of nature, yet it was not, as in our case, a matter of necessity, right? Mary died from necessity. Not Christ doesn't accept these things as a matter of necessity, for he willingly and spontaneously accepted that which was natural, spontaneously. Exposition, books 3, those quotations of chapter 9, 19, 20, and 23. Read them in more context. You'll find that it's an accurate presentation. For his body possessed a unique nature of its own. He conformed to the habits of the body to prove the reality of his own. When he ate and drank, it was a concession, not to his own necessities, but to our habits. He did not come into existence through the passions incident to human conception. He was free from the sins and imperfections of the human body. Hilary of Poitiers, On the Trinity, book 10, paragraphs 23, 25. Read them, the whole book. It gets all into this. Maximus concurs. He, that's Christ, was free by nature, from the necessity of nature, since he did not owe his existence to the law of generation that applies to us. So conception, that he was not conceived by regular human procreation, is conceived by the Spirit, is why this occurred. Ambiguum, book 1, 516. Compare this to Augustine, who explains, everyone who's born of sexual intercourse is in fact sinful flesh, since that alone, which is not born of such intercourse, was not sinful flesh. He writes this on marriage and concupiscence, book 1, chapter 13. The saints also taught that Christ voluntarily allowed himself to die. Death was an act of his own free will. Hilary of Poitiers, On the Trinity, book 10, paragraph 11. Compare this to the Theotokos, who could not escape death, according to St. Germanus. Offering in his life-giving fallen asleep when he willingly accepted to sleep on our behalf is something that Andrew of Crete says in passing on the Nativity, homily 2, chapter 6. He bowed his head and gave up the ghost. Who can thus sleep when he pleases, as Jesus died when he pleased? Augustine, Tractate on John, 119, paragraph 6. For doubtless he was able not to die if he willed not, but he did die because he willed. Augustine, On the Trinity, book 4, paragraph 17. You just beware the translation actually used the word would, which actually means willed in the past tense. It's just late 19th century English. For he did not, when he had expired, bowed his head, as happens with us, but when he had bent his head, then he expired. Chrysostom, comments in John 19:30. When he prayed that he might escape death, it was with his divine will, naturally willing and permitting it, that he did so, pray and agonize and fear. And again, when his divine will willed that his human will should choose death, the passion became voluntary to him. For it was not as God only, but also as man, that he voluntarily surrendered himself to death. So Damascene, Exposition, book 3, chapter 18. So you can't say, because it's a heresy, only in his divine will, his human will didn't will whether he could die. No, the passion became voluntary to him, for it was not only as God only, but also as man that he voluntarily surrendered himself to death, because he did not have sin. He had to choose to die. Unlike the rest of us, we have sin. We die by default. So again, there's one last possible objection. Objection 5. Mary voluntarily experienced death and passions somehow. I'm just going to respond. Name a single saint who taught this. Or how about Romans 8:10? Would not apply to Mary. If Christ is in you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness. So, her spirit's not alive because of righteousness. Christ is not in her. Her body's not dead because of sin. All this doesn't apply. I mean, we got pretty obvious scriptures that apply to this. And lastly, just to rehash, the saints teach she could not escape death and that she inherited this from Adam. The saints teach that Christ did not inherit his corruptibility or blameless passions from Adam. The saints teach that Christ had pre-lapsarian flesh and Mary had post-lapsarian flesh, and both now have glorified flesh. The saints have no other teaching, and that's why the Orthodox Church does not believe in Immaculate Conception, but believes in the Theotokos, sinless, holy, graceful creation, greatest intercessor for mankind, only way salvation was possible because God became flesh through her, but she had post-lapsarian flesh. Please leave comments, forward this video to others to help them. I found nothing else in the English language to make this available. I've got a mountain of more material, but we got to interact with this stuff first. Please use the citations to why I shared the screen to look up the works, read them in context. You will find this is the teaching of the Orthodox Church, of the church before the schism. God bless you and have a great day.